what lies at the edge of the world? That question, simple, elegant, and haunting, stirred the heart of a man over 2,000 years ago. A man not of empire or conquest, but of stars and seas. Long before Columbus crossed the Atlantic, before Vikings carved their sagas into the northern wind, one Greek dared to sail into the unknown. His name was Pytheas of Massalia. Born in a city of trade, ideas, and exploration, Massalia, modern-day Marseille, Pytheas wasn't just a sailor. He was a scientist, an astronomer, and an observer of nature at a time when myths and monsters still ruled the edges of the map. And what he saw, measured and documented, changed the way we saw the Earth. Massalia, around 350 BCE, a Greek colony nestled on the rocky shores of southern Gaul. It was a city where east met west. Ships from Phoenicia, Egypt, Iberia, and Rome traded goods and stories in its agora. Here, he was born into a world of thinkers. By Pytheas's youth, the great minds of Ionia and Athens had already begun shaping human thought. Anaximander had drawn the first speculative maps. Pythagoras spoke of numbers underlying the cosmos. Aristotle, still alive during Pytheas's early life, taught of spheres and natural motion. But Pytheas looked farther, to the actual horizon. It was a time of intellectual paradox. Scholars debated whether the Earth was round, yet most maps ended in oceans spilling off the edge. Beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, lay what many called Oceanus, the infinite, unknowable sea. And yet Pytheas believed the world could be known, measured, explored, understood. Around 320 BCE, Pytheas did something astonishing. He set sail from Massalia into the Atlantic, alone among Greeks of his era. His destination? The edge of the known world, to sail north past Iberia, past the British Isles, and into what we now call the Arctic Circle. His journey, later recounted by writers like Strabo, Pliny the Elder, and Diodorus, is mostly lost to time. His original book, On the Ocean, Peri tou Okeanou, has vanished, like the man himself. But from what we can gather, Pytheas traveled over 6,000 miles by sea and land. He visited Britain, which he called Bretonnic, centuries before Julius Caesar would even land there. He measured its circumference with surprising accuracy, estimating it at about 4,000 miles, only slightly off from reality. He described the people, their customs, how they farmed grain and built with timber. He observed the moon's effect on tides, a connection no one before him had made with such clarity. And then, he went further north, past the Orkney Islands, past the Shetlands, into the mists of myth. He reached what he called Thule. What was Thule? Pytheas wrote that it was 6 days' sail north of Britain, a land where the sun barely set in summer, and the sea turned to a gelatinous mass, likely his poetic way of describing sea ice or frozen slush. He had entered the realm of the Arctic, the land of the midnight sun. Today, historians debate where Thule actually was. Some say Norway, others Iceland, or even the Faroe Islands. But the exact location is less important than what Pytheas achieved. He was the first Mediterranean explorer to describe the Arctic Circle, to witness polar daylight, and to report ice-covered seas. In a world still dominated by flat Earth myths, his observations supported the idea of a spherical Earth, and an Earth far larger than most Greeks imagined. Pytheas saw the edge of the world, and found not monsters, but nature. He wasn't merely a traveler, he was a scientist, using a device called a gnomon, essentially a vertical rod casting a shadow. He could determine the latitude of locations by the angle of the sun at noon. He used this to measure how far north he had traveled, likely the first in history to do so rigorously. He recognized the relationship between the moon and tides, and carefully documented climatic variations in northern Europe. And Pytheas did all this without maps, without magnetic compasses, without accurate clocks, just the sky and his mind. When he returned to Massalia, he wrote his findings in On the Ocean, an astonishing work of geography, ethnography, and astronomy. But not everyone believed him. Many contemporaries mocked Pytheas. The great geographer Strabo, writing centuries later, dismissed him as a liar. Pytheas makes many incredible statements, he wrote, calling his voyage a fable. Eratosthenes, the brilliant librarian of Alexandria who calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing precision, praised Pytheas's observations, but even he was cautious. And so, despite his achievements, Pytheas vanished from historical respect. His book was lost. His name survived only as a footnote, often questioned, often derided. It would take 1,500 years before his insights would be truly appreciated. Centuries later, as new explorers took to the seas, Pytheas's words returned. When Vikings set sail from Norway to Iceland and Greenland, they echoed routes he had already described. When Columbus sought a western passage, it was with knowledge built on the idea of a spherical Earth, a concept Pytheas helped reinforce. When scientists of the Enlightenment read ancient manuscripts, they rediscovered his observations on tides, latitude, and Arctic phenomena, and realized he had been right. Today, historians and scientists alike consider Pytheas of Massalia to be one of the earliest scientific explorers in Western history. What happens to truth when it is lost in time? When a voice, soft but brilliant, vanishes beneath the tide of history, does it fade, or does it wait to be rediscovered? Pytheas of Massalia spoke the truth of the far north. He sailed farther than any of his people dared, brought back tales of midnight suns, gelatinous seas, and a round earth ruled by natural rhythms. But for centuries, his voice was met with silence, or scorn. And yet, the truth, like the tide he studied, always returns. Pytheas wrote a book unlike anything before it. Peri tu Okeanou, On the Ocean, is perhaps the greatest lost work of classical antiquity. It wasn't just a log of islands and coastlines. It was a study of nature, tides, climate, and culture. He described farming in foggy lands, daylight that never ceased, frozen seas, and stars unfamiliar to Mediterranean eyes. But no copy survived, not a single scroll. What we know of Pytheas comes secondhand, filtered through the judgments and politics of others. Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE, called Pytheas a fabricator. Why? Perhaps because he threatened their worldview. His descriptions didn't fit the neat Ptolemaic geometry of the world. To admit his observations was to admit a world much larger, stranger, and less Greek than they preferred. But others did quote him. Pliny the Elder references his descriptions of tides. Diodorus Siculus uses him to describe Britain. And most importantly, Eratosthenes used Pytheas's latitudinal data to help calculate the Earth's circumference, and got remarkably close to the correct number. Even erased, he still shaped the map. Pytheas did more than see the north. He helped invent how to measure the Earth. Using a gnomon, a simple upright stick casting a shadow, he observed the angle of the sun at noon. This allowed him to determine latitude with precision unheard of in his time. And then, something even more radical. He attempted to estimate distances using time and travel. This was, in effect, an early experiment in understanding longitude, a concept that would bedevil sailors until the 18th century. We sometimes forget. Knowing your position on the Earth isn't trivial, especially without modern tools. But Pytheas, with only the sky in his mind, got close. When later cartographers attempted to redraw the world, from Ptolemy to Mercator, they struggled with the geography Pytheas had walked and sailed. For centuries, his maps were off-limits. But slowly, the northern truth emerged. Consider this. Pytheas may have been the first scientist to observe sea ice. His description of a place where neither earth nor sea nor air exists is chillingly poetic. He spoke of a substance that was not solid nor liquid, upon which one could neither sail nor walk. This has been interpreted as pancake ice, or perhaps the slushy melange of the polar ice edge. And more, he described polar twilight, a sun that grazed the horizon but never set. These observations were laughed off as fiction for generations, until, in the modern era, explorers ventured north and saw what Pytheas had seen. And the echoes of his words rang true. He had reached, or at least described, the Arctic Circle more than 2,000 years ago. Pytheas had no school, no students, no known descendants, but he had heirs in spirit. Centuries later, men like Ibn Battuta, Zheng He, and Marco Polo would traverse vast distances. And though they followed different paths, they were guided by the same principle: to observe and to report. In the 10th century, Arab geographers referenced northern lands and changing tides, ideas that Pytheas helped introduce. When the Vikings sailed to Iceland, Greenland, and even Vinland, likely North America, they walked unknowingly in Pytheas's footsteps. Though their sagas never named him, his route across the northern sea had already been charted in thought. And then came the age of exploration. Magellan, Cook, Darwin, they became legends for going where few had gone. But Pytheas had done it first, and with less. No fleet, no compass, no sponsorship by kings, just curiosity. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as scholars began to critically examine classical texts, something remarkable happened. They started comparing Pytheas's claims with modern data. His estimate of Britain's circumference? Within 15% of the actual size. His descriptions of tides? Consistent with the lunar tidal cycle? His mention of Thule's solar cycle? Astronomically accurate. Piece by piece, Pytheas's credibility was restored. Modern historians now view him as not only a legitimate explorer, but one of the founding figures of scientific geography. His influence remains invisible, like gravity, not always seen, but always felt in how we measure, describe, and understand our planet. Pytheas lived in a world smaller than ours. No telescopes, no satellites, no global communication. But his mind was vast. He understood implicitly the interconnectedness of natural forces: moon and sea, sun and latitude, light and time. He represents a kind of scientist often lost to us, not the academic in a library, but the empirical wanderer. The one who asks, "What is out there?" and then goes to see. He measured shadows to read the shape of Earth. He listened to tides to hear the whisper of the moon. He reminds us that exploration is not conquest. It is observation with humility. To know that the universe is vast and that truth hides not just in books, but in winds, waves, and starlight. Pytheas of Massalia is gone. His city still stands, but his tomb is lost. His writings are dust. His name nearly forgotten, but his journey remains. His spirit sails on every ship that ventures into the unknown, in every satellite that orbits the Earth, in every child who looks up and asks, "What lies beyond?" The next time you watch the moon pull the tide, or gaze at a polar map, or follow the sunset until it never sets, remember the man who dared to go beyond the edge of the map. A Greek from a harbor town, a scientist centuries ahead of his time.